I don't know, we're waiting. We're waiting. I know we're on the air. We are on the air live. And I was promised absolute. Oh, well, there you go.
See? It's a call.
Oh, okay, okay.
Call from, who could it be?
Well, you know who it's from. Basil, how you doing? Okay, Basil's going to be our only caller in during this entire hour because we don't have any other phone here besides the Basil phone. Well, the inky-dinky Basil phone. Basil, and I'll quote him first, and then I'll give you a synopsis of what he's saying. He said, okay.
Well, who's Basil?
Oh, Basil Buddha-Cat from Basil Buddha-Cat Presents.
Okay, for people who don't know.
Exclamation point. Sunday, 11 a.m., Friday, 10 p.m., So Basil says to me, he says, I saw your shows that you taped, and by the way, one of them's on tonight at 9:30, and the other one's on tomorrow, Thursday at noon 30. So you can watch, right after you watch this live show, you can actually watch the show that we taped the other day, Marty and Emily and I. But anyway, so Basil says, make sure that you mention about how Jesus, there's a bunch of years in the life of Jesus Christ where he was kind of missing in action, and there's not a lot of correct. There's a lot of years in his life that are kind of just say yes. Thank you. So there's a lot of years in his life where he was kind of nobody knows where exactly he was, and apparently Basil's talked to
Jesus,
a scion of Basil. First of all, Basil's seated at the right hand of God.
That's right.
Because as Marty pointed out to us, Marty's the one that actually told me. I had no idea. Because Marty came on Basil's show, and Marty went to pet Basil and got a paper cut. That's when we all realized that Basil's not really alive anymore, that he's a two-dimensional avatar of himself.
Yeah.
So Basil says, he says, make sure you mention about Buddhism, because it's Basil Buddha-Cat.
Oh, right.
Because Basil, like myself, are devout Christians religiously and Buddhist philosophically. So Basil's saying, make sure you mention when you play the role of Jesus in this discussion, when you have that opportunity, mention about Buddhism and how Jesus, in those years he disappeared, could very well have traveled to the East and studied Buddhism, because Buddhism precedes Christianity by quite a few years. But anyway, so...
how would he travel to the East?
By foot.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Basil. Thanks for calling in. Bye. Okay, now, Emily, go ahead. You're on.
Okay, so today we're having a debate between
debate. I wouldn't call it debate.
A discussion?
Yeah, discussion.
All right. So we have Marty Heiser and David Stevenson, and we're going to have a discussion between Jesus Christ's philosophies and Ayn Rand's philosophies. And then you're both going to switch places.
So we both get to be Jesus, and we both get to be
Ayn.
Go ahead.
No, Ayn Rand.
But you've got some other things you want.
Well, I mean, we're going to discuss differing economic systems and social systems that might take part, as an explanation in our discussion. Mm-hmm. Capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're going to talk about socialism. A political and economic theory of a social organization that advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Communism. Mm-hmm. A political theory derived from Karl Marx, advocating class war and leading to a society in which all property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. Democracy. Mm-hmm. The system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. Mm-hmm. And what else do we have here? Totalitarianism. A political system in which the state holds total authority over the society and seeks to control all aspects of public and private life wherever possible. And finally, democratic socialist democracies, which is countries where a political movement advocating a gradual and peaceful transition from capitalism to socialism by democratic means, a democratic welfare that incorporates both capitalist and socialist practices.
And during our discussion the other day, Marty aptly pointed out, he mentioned the country of Greece.
Italy,
they're having some economic issues, some economic problems right now. But I got a call since then, between Monday and today, from a fellow in Canada that said, hey, why don't you mention Canada? Because Canada is a socialist democracy, just like Greece is. And Canada is doing pretty well. Canada's, like all these other countries in the world, has health care for all, run by the government, and their people are healthier than Americans on average. The life expectancy is longer, the infant mortality rate is lower. By all measurable standards, all these other countries that have socialized medicine are all better off than America.
Well, you brought up a lot of issues. Let's.
Can we go right to the Jesus Christ and Ayn Rand? Because that's what the people are really tuned in for.
Couple quick thoughts on Jesus' life, where you think that he was missing in action and he went and sat at the feet of Buddha and came back, and there's sort of a hybrid. That from a historical point of view is utter nonsense. Jesus, as you'll recall, made the scene in a splash, birth of a virgin in Bethlehem, and so we know where he was born, and there's extra biblical evidence of that. Josephus comes to mind, a Roman Jewish historian of the time. And then we later pick up Jesus when he was about 12 years old. He was in the temple, as you'll recall, because we make this pilgrimage up to Jerusalem, and he was in the temple, and all the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were just amazed because he was teaching as having authority. And Joseph and Mary, not their shining their best moment as a parent, but they went in this long caravan to go back to Bethlehem, and they, a day into the caravan, they were like, "Where's Jesus? Where's Jesus?" They hightail it back, and Jesus is in the temple, which is kind of the center of the whole religious community, and he's hanging out with all the priests and the Pharisees, and he's opening up the scriptures to them and explaining it to them, because from my perspective, he was a Messiah. On the Bible, it talks about Jesus as being the Word became flesh.
We're all devout Christians here, so we're all of the same group.
But then at that point, you're right, because Jesus lived for 33 years, and the first 30 years, he was apparently a pretty good carpenter, working in Joseph's carpentry shop in a backwater town of Nazareth that no one really ever heard of. As a matter of fact, they spoke with some kind of an accent, so if you were from Nazareth, they knew, because you had kind of like a hick kind of sound.
Aramaic was a language, wasn't it? Because Mel Gibson, who's
the Passion of Christ.
Mel Gibson, who has a little issue with blaming the Jews for every ill of the world. Mel Gibson actually had them film the movie with the people speaking in Aramaic, the native language.
But you'll recall when Jesus was, and his movie, The Passion of Christ, was a compelling movie, regardless of his problems with alcoholism and his anti-Semitism. It was a good movie. Much like Bill Cosby, that's a whole other story.
We were talking about Bill Cosby before the show, trying to we dug up a few nuggets of goodness in him too.
So if you get past a serial rape, Bill Cosby had a lot of good things to say.
So Jesus spoke Aramaic with an accent.
No, but the point is that you're right. In the first 30 years of Jesus' life, he wasn't, his ministry was just that last 3 years. And the point about the accent, if you'll recall, when Jesus was crucified, and all the disciples scattered, and the one who scattered probably the most, if it can be said that, is the Apostle Peter. And it was a maid that came up and said, "I know you were with him. I can tell by your accent." And Peter denied him how many times?
3 times.
3 times.
And the cock crowed. So he was not a man of position, not a man of property or possession, but he was the Messiah. And the last 3 years of his life was his public ministry, concluding with his death and resurrection on the cross.
Got to say it because Basil just texted me. He said, by the way, Basil speaks Aramaic too, amongst his 97 languages.
And then the one other thing you brought up was Canada. I happen to know a little bit about Canada. I married a Canadian. I have 4 brother-in-laws up in Canada, 2 sister-in-law, 27 kids. So I know a little bit about Canada. And far from being this socialist utopia, it's actually a tax haven. Right now, the corporate tax rate in Canada is lower than the United States.
That's why Burger King wanted to go there.
Burger King, your boy Warren Buffett, who is Barack Obama's capitalist butt boy.
He ain't my boy.
Go ahead. He's your boy's boy.
No, and the president's not a boy, but go ahead.
Okay, he is the the President of the United States Economic Advisor. We'll put it that way. And lo and behold, he sold out so quick it made your head spin. He took Burger King, meshed it with Tim Hortons Donuts, which is a big Canadian firm, and hightailed it to Canada.
Go Toronto Maple Leafs, Tim Horton.
So you wonder why things have switched around a bit and the economy is lagging a bit. It could be because far from being a socialist country, Canada is actually lowering tax rates. And
but it's still a socialist democracy.
Well, I mean, I guess we're all socialist democracies in the sense that we're not completely controlled by the government,
or business.
But, America had always been a safe place to own and run a business if you put your work, if you put your sweat into a job, and that's why when the president says things like, "If you have a business, you didn't build that." And when stuff like that happens, for those of us that do own businesses and then do build things up, it really strikes at the core.
That a quote?
Right. So
you didn't build your
If he says that,
No, what he said was...
All right, well, let's give you a credit for being at least a twinge close with a paraphrase. But Basil says, get on to the show. Jesus Christ... Son of God.
So I'm playing the role of Jesus.
I'm Ayn Rand, but you can call me Ayn. Introduce yourself, Jesus.
Well, I am playing the role, representing, as it will, for this television show, Jesus Christ and his philosophy, and I am, humbled to do that. I feel as if Jesus Christ was the Son of God, the Messiah prophet that was prophesied in the Old Testament. We were talking a little bit about Jesus' death and apparent resurrection. It's interesting because if you go to you brought up Buddhism, the Muslim faith, Confucius, Baha'u'llah, any of the grand world religions, you can go to the founders' tomb. Mecca and Medina, that's where you go to see Muhammad. Buddha, he's in a shrine, I think, somewhere in the east. Baha'u'llah, Confucius, all these people you can go. But Jesus came and said, he didn't say, this is the way and this is the truth. He said, I am the way and I am the truth. And then he went on, and this is where people get a little nervous. He said, no man comes to the Father except through me. He claimed exclusive truth.
Gatekeeper.
Yet, you cannot go. I mean, there are 2.6 billion Christians on the planet right now, and there is no shrine, no place you can go to where the body of Jesus rests, because he claims that he rose from the dead. And so there's a sort of a historical marker there. Either Jesus actually did rise from the dead, and he was who he claimed to be,
and ascended into heaven,
or he didn't. So if you're interested in looking at the historical evidence for the resurrection, it's pretty compelling.
Now, and the other two major religions in the world, Judaism and Islam, they both recognize Jesus as a great philosopher. They have total, complete respect for him. The only difference between Christians and Jews and Muslims is Jews and Muslims don't recognize Jesus as being the Son of God. Other than that, there's complete unanimity of thought. Yeah,
and you're absolutely right in the sense that the Judaism is the trunk, and we are the branch. They're the vine, and we're the branches connected to that. Jesus was Jewish. All the disciples were Jewish. The first century church was Jewish. And Jesus claimed to be the fulfillment of the promised Messiah. And there are so many prophecies in the Old Testament that are, if you want to look up at home, look into Psalm 22, look into Isaiah 53. But the ones that I find so interesting, for example, in some of these prophecies talk about the actual crucifixion of Christ. And he says that my hands and feet were pierced. It says that they gambled for my garments. These are all prophecies and found in Psalm 22.
Well, that was a very popular way of killing people in those days.
Here's the thing, Here's the thing. You hit on it perfectly. Because Psalms was written 1,000 years before crucifixion. It was written 1,000 years, and it's talking about this prophecy where you would die when your nails are pierced and your feet are pierced, and that they're going to gamble for your garments. How can you put that prophecies together? That was 1,000 years before the capital punishment by the Roman Empire was used. So it's pretty compelling. I mean, you want to look at, if you're just out there think, well, Christianity, all religions are the same. It's interesting to look into the prophecies that were fulfilled by Jesus and the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus.
Even Christianity is many different shades of the same religion. And we'll get into that when I take the role of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior,
I have
later on.
One
go
other
ahead.
point on that, because
don't jump me on that now. Come on.
You talked about the Muslim faith.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because there's another great show on this massive channel here called the Marty Heiser Show, and we had two imams on the show last week.
Yeah.
And we talked a little about Sharia law and some of the like we have a common ancestor in Abraham. Actually, their eschatology in the end times, they feel that when the caliphate comes together, who's going to come back but Jesus Christ? It's in their eschatology, it's in their end times, which is somewhat unnerving. But one difference that you have with the Muslim faith and the Christian faith is this concept of forgiveness and love. And we were talking about Sharia law, and there's things. If you steal something, you should get your hand cut off.
Right.
If a woman is caught in adultery, she is to be stoned. And the interesting thing that Jesus
That's in the Bible too, by the way.
My point exactly.
Yeah.
My point exactly, because in the Old Testament it did talk about stoning a woman caught in adultery. Then move forward to Jesus Christ.
To the New Testament.
And what did Jesus say? Because the Pharisees said, we have caught this woman in the very act.
Yeah.
Before you point the finger at someone, you point two fingers back at your...
Exactly. Well, his point was, he who is without sin cast the first stone.
A forgiving God rather than a vengeful God, which is the Old Testament God.
Exactly, but at the same time, it wasn't it wasn't the moral absolutes. Adultery is still wrong and bad and breaks up families. It's not good.
Right.
But with Jesus Christ, you have the opportunity for forgiveness, because he died on the cross as a sacrifice for our sins. It isn't Jesus came along and said, boys will be boys. You kids go out and have a good time. That whole adultery thing was no big deal anyways. No. Now you're sounding like Bill Clinton. But he did say, that I came and I took the price for your sin. Yeah. And so it's, whereas the Muslim faith doesn't have that. If you're caught in adultery, you get stoned. Yeah. And if you're apostate, you get killed. And honor killings and honor.
You don't have to convince me. I'm a devout Christian too. I understand all that stuff, it's great stuff. And I'm very pleased to consider myself a Christian. Although I feel very comfortable and have friends that are Muslims and friends that are Jews, and they're by their behavior I judge them, and it's very, very good behavior for the most part. I mean, every religion has its zealots, and every religion has its lunatics, and every religion has its mass murderers, and it's a sad thing, but it's not a function of any of the three religions. It's a function of bad behavior, bad choices by people that choose to be bad. But Ayn Rand, I'm playing Ayn Rand, and first of all, let me just say, my name is not Ayn Rand. My name is Ayn Rand, because it's important that, you got to get that little caustic garble in there to, really show how tough we are. Now, Ayn Rand's the author of some interesting stories. Yes. Her background, she came from Russia. The government, right? The Stalinists, the Leninists, when the revolution came, Russia put into place communism. And it was meant to be a utopian society based on books by Karl Marx and then a fellow named Hegel. Marx and Engels, actually. Hegel was a different philosopher. But their thought was that we would make a perfect state out of a czarist state. And everybody would put their hard work into it. Everybody would share from what came out of that hard work. Doesn't work out, and we were talking. I gave these guys a joke on when we did the show, not live, but on DVD, that just to show how communism, noble as it may be, fails in principle, fails in practice. You have two fellows talking. One's a communist and one's not a communist. And the not a communist says to the communist, so I understand that if under communism, if you had two goats and I didn't have a goat, you'd give me a goat, and we'd both have a goat. And the communist said, oh yeah, that's right. And if you had 2 sheep and I didn't have a sheep, you'd give me a sheep, and then we'd both have a sheep. Communist says, absolutely. And if you had 2 horses and I didn't have a horse, you'd give me a horse, and then the communist jumps in and says, no. And the question to that is, what do you mean? 2 sheep, 2 goats, why not 2 horses? And the communist glib response is, well, I've got 2 horses. In other words, in theory it works great, but in practice it doesn't play out because human nature. And speaking of human nature, we have Ayn Rand, who left Russia because her parents' business was taken away by the communists. Yes. Came to America. She went to Hollywood, and from there she became a prolific author. She loved America, became a prolific author, and Marty disputes me on this, but I'm going to tell you, because for right now, I'm Ayn Rand, so you take my word for it. I'm an author of, amongst other books, that right on the screen, thank you, Screw the Poor, Let Them Die, and Other Humorous Observations. And that's my best known book, because that really gets at the heart of my philosophy, is that there's only so much stuff to go around, and if a person works hard enough and gets way more stuff than other people, and they get left by the wayside because they don't have what it takes to get to a loftier place economically and monetarily, too bad.
Well, I don't think Ayn Rand really said screw the poor and let them die. I don't.
That's still. Hey, I'm Ryan. Don't dispute me. I'm Ayn Rand. Okay. Damn it. That's my philosophy, and take my word for it. So, Jesus, what say ye?
Well, playing the role of Jesus and representing his worldview, basically Jesus came and turned the structure of the world on its head. I mean, it's almost like if you had a pyramid, in the world, the idea is get to the top, have people underneath you, and then you're it. And Jesus came and he sort of flipped that pyramid the other way. He actually said, the greatest among you will be the servant to the least. There's stories in the New Testament about the Good Samaritan, who found the man that was injured and hurt on the road, and he stopped and he took time to heal the man, and he brought him to the inn and he paid the innkeeper. So it isn't what's in it for me, how much can I get? But it's really how much can I give? How much can I love? What are the gifts that God's given me that I can help other people with?
And I'm Ayn Rand, and I'm going to tell you right now, that philosophy stinks. You work hard, you get ahead, and then some guy comes along and he wants you to give stuff back to the poor people. Right. What's wrong with that?
Well,
that's why I became an atheist, by the way.
It's true. I can understand if you have everything taken away, you're going to be angry.
That's why I became an atheist. But I'm not going to get over it. So don't expect me to get over that greed, because I'm Ayn Rand, and if I want to be greedy, darn it, I'm going to be greedy. Jesus.
But what you just described there, Ayn Rand, and by the way, the historic Ayn Rand was somewhat a little bit. I don't know if we get a shot of that, but it's a bit of a stretch.
Well, I got a little prettier when I got older, apparently.
Yeah, you're going to have to stretch that if you feel as if that's your real Ayn Rand. But Ayn, what I would just point out to you, what you just described is you've worked for something, and then you said. And somebody comes along and says, I've got to give that to other people.
I'm speaking to you, Jesus. You're the one that came along and said the pyramid should be flipped upside down and the rich should, in fact, help out the poor. Bunk, I say to that. Bunk. I'm keeping what I made. I'm not giving anything back to anybody. Not a government, not some little gutter snipe that in the turn of the last century would have been working in a factory culling through coal and end up by the age of 15 years old with fingers that sort of look like this because because all the fingers kind of get worn away by the rubbing of the coal. Hey, that's too bad.
Yeah.
That's too bad. Sorry.
Here's what
my kids are doing better than that, and that's the way they're going to be. Go ahead.
Here's the Christian perspective on what you're talking about. First of all, there isn't someone that comes along and confiscates from you and gives to someone else. That's redistribution of wealth. It's very popular with the current.
But that's what you're telling people to do, to redistribute their wealth.
Far from it. And there is no someone who's going to take from you and give to someone else.
They don't need to, because you're going to do it. Of your own benevolence.
Okay, let me finish my point. I'll start again. There isn't someone who's going to come and take from you and give to someone else, because then that person becomes the arbiter. It's called crony capitalism. We're going to decide. We're going to help our friends. We're going to take from these guys. And we're going to give it to a group that's going to make a factory like Solyndra, and we're going to do it because nudge, nudge, wink, wink. That guy raised a lot of money for my campaign. That's not what we're talking about.
You're getting a little too political there, Jesus. So let's keep it to religion.
Let's
keep it to religion, Jesus.
Okay, this is the Christian point of view. The Christian point of view is, if a man slaps you on the right cheek, offer him the other. If a man forces you to go 1 mile, go the extra mile. If a man asks you for his coat, give him your shirt also. And that's the philosophy from a Christian perspective. There isn't some overarching centralized government that's going to confiscate from you and give to the poor. I think you would be against that, given your history. Again, I'm having trouble picturing you as Ayn Rand, but I'm going to go with my suspended imagination.
I don't know why not. I don't know why not.
But the point, from the Christian point of view, it talks about having a new heart. Taking a heart of stone and giving you a heart of flesh. Where, it's interesting when you look at the life of the disciples. One of the disciples was a tax collector. And one of the most hated people, because, you had a certain area, a certain district, and the Romans said, you gotta collect $100,000 worth of Roman coins from here for the taxes. Now, if you could go in there and gouge $120,000 worth of Roman coins, you got to keep the 20. And so they were despised by the people. And yet Jesus welcomed these people. I mean, it was mixed bag. You had a doctor, you had a tax collector, you had a fisherman, and it went on. But he didn't say that you can't confiscate. But he brought a new heart, and he said, you are not of this world. Your reward is in heaven. And while you're here, share freely. There's actually in the Acts chapter 2, it talked about the first century church. They said they had things in common, and they went from house to house breaking bread. And it said the Lord was adding to their number day by day those that were being saved. And it really is quite a revolutionary transformation when you talk about being born again, when you surrender your life to Christ. Those things that were your motivations before aren't after. But there isn't some arbitrary government that comes in and confiscates. So, Ayn, you might make a good Christian.
Well, I'm gonna say this. It sounds like you're offering me a job. So you might have a spot in your heart and a spot in your group of people and your disciples for a greedy miser. So, forget it. Because look, I'm too busy making money to have time for this side gig of being somebody's apostle. Besides, I'm an atheist. I am Ayn Rand. I am an atheist. I don't believe in God. Sorry, not for me, my friend. Okay? But, having said that, I don't know. I was going to say something else and you confused me. Oh, Lord, you confused me.
Well, no, really the Christian view. And it's interesting when you compare the Christian worldview with, say, the communist worldview, which I guess we can both disagree with. Because in practice, as you described communism, it's where people will give spontaneously of their excess to the people that don't, and everything, it's a great idea. But what the Bible says in the Christian worldview is that all of us have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And the idea there is that none of us, you can be religious, you can be a good guy, you can be a pillar of the community, but from the Bible's perspective, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But that's why Jesus died on the cross. I have one little story, if I can share it real quick.
Please do. We're going to take a little shorter time on our changing roles. We're going to go a little bit past the half hour, so go ahead. Because we spent a little time talking to Basil in the beginning, so we lost some of our time. Go ahead.
You don't want to have Jesus upstaged by a cat. That's just generally speaking.
Even the cat of all cats?
Even the cat of all
Who sits
cats.
at the right hand of the Father?
Seated at the right hand of the Father? Doesn't that count for something?
I'm trying to avoid as much sacrilege as possible.
Okay.
And get through this. But it's an interesting story, and it actually happened during the time of Ayn Rand's
All right,
childhood.
seated in the lap of the Father.
Oh, okay. Go on.
Seated in the lap of the Father. Is that okay?
I'm envisioning, some kind of a, James Bond Goldfinger-esque, thing. But be that as it may.
Go ahead.
Okay, so early in the history of Russia, right around 1917, they had the Red Army, the Bolsheviks, the Communists came in, and then you had the White Army.
Yep.
And as the story,
those are the Mensheviks.
I think they were like they were honorable to the Tsar. They were still trying to
and the Bolsheviks kind of slaughtered them off.
Yeah, well, Lenin came in. Of course, everyone was exhausted from World War I, so there were actually food riots in Moscow where there wasn't enough food.
Yeah.
And you know who sent Lenin in on a train?
Who?
The dastardly Germans. Look it up. It's a true story. They knew that he was a rabble-rouser, and they said, how are we going to undermine our opponent in World War I? So they bought him a train ticket and said, good luck on you, and sent him off with a bottle of vodka, and he, got the whole thing going. So it was only in an incredibly weakened Russian society that Lenin came to power. It was as a result of bread riots in Moscow and helped to bring it about. But for our purposes in this story, it basically, the story goes that the White Army, who was out in the forest, like not in the cities. The Bolsheviks had the cities. They were starving, and they had one stash of food to feed this whole army. And one of the captains, one of the main leaders of this army, said, no one can eat of this, and if you do, you will pay the price of 40 lashes. You'll have to pay the price because we're all starving. We're going to ration this out, and no one can take it. And that seems fine. Well, as the story goes on, it comes to light that someone had been stealing food. And the captain of the White Army said, I want to find out who did it, and whoever did has to pay the price because it's not fair and it's not just. They have to be whipped. So after the investigation, they came back and said to the captain, well, we found the culprit. We found who has been stealing the food. But Captain, it's your mother. And so the mother came before him as the judge, and he said, you have been caught red-handed stealing food. We're all starving. You have to pay the price.
40
you
lashes.
have to pay 40 lashes. And he basically said, that is the punishment for what you did wrong. And no one could argue with that because it was fair, it was just.
Right.
But at that point, that son, who was also the captain, took off his robes, went out to the whipping pole, and took the 40 lashes for the mother.
Yeah.
So that's the basis of the Christian worldview. Sometimes people wonder, what is this whole dying for my sins? When Jesus died on the cross. That is the essence of Christianity. It's not that, hey, what's happened is wrong, there aren't any moral absolutes, you do what you want, everything's fine. No, sin has its consequences.
Brother, you're preaching to the choir here, I'm telling you. Maybe not in the audience, but
Jesus died, but Jesus took all those sins on himself and died on the cross. It was the one price for all time. The blood that was shed for the forgiveness of sin, one sacrifice for all time. And so it's like just a wonderful opportunity, because if we surrender ourselves to Christ and say, Lord, I've messed up. I have not done things that I'm proud of. I know I have sinned, but thank you that Jesus died on the cross for me. Because greater love has no man than he lay down his life for a friend. And God demonstrates his love towards us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us.
Preaching to the choir, but you're absolutely right.
It's and as compared to the Ayn Rand scenario, it's the ultimate giving, sacrificing of yourself, and I would imagine from Ayn Rand's objectivist perspective, that would not be what you're all about.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm not part of that choir. These other maybe that dude who's playing me is part of that choir, but I'm Ayn Rand, and I'm not part of that choir. So, sorry, I'm going to stay an atheist. And, hey, there's a cute little kid out in the audience. There's like a 15-year-old out in the audience. All right, yeah. As you well know, Ayn Rand had through her life, some boy toys, and Emily brought that to light about how Ayn had followers.
Alan Greenspan, who
followers who who she gave jobs to, and in exchange for that,
But Alan Greenspan was a
image of a
member.
boy toy, and Alan Greenspan isn't exactly what happened.
No, but he was a member of the group.
He
He
was.
was also.
He was, yeah.
Yeah,
was
he
there something
was.
going on inside?
I doubt it, because he's married to that journalist, right? I forget her name.
Cokie Roberts?
Not Cokie Roberts, the other one on MSNBC.
Okay.
But be that as it may, yeah, but it does get a little spicy with Ayn Rand. With you, Ayn, geez, you loose woman.
Well, you know what? That's because I'm Ayn Rand, and I worked hard to get to where I got to, and don't deny me anything and tell me that I've got to give something back to anybody.
No.
So the hell with them.
So it seems
I refer back to my book.
at your funeral,
Screw the poor, let them starve, and other humorous observations.
and apparently at your funeral, Alan Greenspan bought a 6-foot flower arrangement in the shape of a dollar sign.
He should have got it from me while I was still alive, you know? You know, these people do a lot of stuff for other folks and say a lot of nice things about people after they die. And they forgot to say the things while they were alive. That's important, isn't it?
You know, it's interesting. You bring up death, and really, you know, when you look at anyone's worldview, I think there's 5 questions. One is, you know, what is the purpose of life? The other question is, what are the moral absolutes, and how do we know that? The other question is, where did we come from? We just an accident of a godless cosmos. The other question is, what happens to us after we die?
Right, exactly.
And it's an interesting question,
Yeah.
because everyone here and everyone out there in the vast viewing audience,
We all wonder, where do we go?
Going to die.
Right.
Where do we
Yeah.
go when we?
I mean, I think of the T-shirt, you know, where it says "God is dead," signed Nietzsche. I saw another one that said "Nietzsche is dead,"
Dead.
Signed God.
Signed God, yeah. So, but it is. I mean, in our human experience,
Yeah.
you know, whether you're Ayn Rand, whether you're, you know, whatever perspective, religious or otherwise, we all have this in common. We're all going to die. And the question then is, well, what happens after that? I guess Ayn Rand would say, one and done, it's over.
Yeah.
And any speculation otherwise is just nothing.
Therefore,
right.
there's no point in doing anything good for anybody while you're alive, because once you're gone, they bury you.
That's right.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a live,
history
drink, and be
forgets
happy,
about you.
Live, drink, and be happy, for tomorrow we die. Or, as the Russian government, which was also atheistic, said,
Yes.
Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, that the idea that
You manipulated people to do things
Right.
by
Under the
feeding
guise
them religion.
of
You
religion.
manipulated them into accepting
Right.
a lesser fate by giving them, well, at least you got religion.
Funny thing is, along those lines, where Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses, when you look at the current church in China, essentially a communist, atheist society.
Very capitalist, but go ahead, yeah.
Okay, but I mean, they still adhere, you know, to capitalist principles.
Very totalitarian, let's say.
It's true, but what they found, actually, one of the fastest growing churches on the planet is in China, and it's house churches. It's not the government funded, you know, a government overseen church, but it's house churches. It's just growing and growing and growing. So they're saying that, you know, Karl Marx said religion is the opiate of the masses, but in China, religion is the amphetamine of the masses, because the government doesn't know exactly what to do with all these, you know, Christians.
Right.
And it's interesting in 2 things. One, it happened in both places in fanticide.
Yeah.
In first century Rome, if you had a sickly child or a child that you didn't want, you just left it out and it would die of exposure.
Right,
Yeah.
But the
right.
first century church, the church members would come and would save the child and say, no, this child has value because it's created in the image of God. And you have the same dynamic going on in China, where you're only allowed one child.
Right,
and
right.
the coveted child, of course, is the male child. Of
course.
Sorry, but, you know, we can all...
No, it's another topic.
That's an unfortunate fact about the world, that the world tends to favor
Right.
males over females.
Yeah, well, there's in 60 Minutes, they
Very
had
unfortunate.
a story about it in India, where they had an ultrasound, a storefront ultrasound, right next door to the storefront abortion clinic.
Right,
And you
right.
would go in and get an ultrasound, and if it was a woman,
Yeah.
you went right next door and had the abortion.
Yeah.
And isn't that awful?
Yeah.
Don't get me started
to
on
favor
abortion.
to favor men over women. Yeah.
Well, to
No.
kill babies is no walk in the park either.
Well, but it's you put the two together. But the crux of the crux of the matter being that you're killing them because they're women. women, and women are less valuable to many societies than,
I would
males.
say, from my perspective, the killing of babies, male or female, is equally abhorrent and grisly and
but the fact of the matter is we're talking about killing females because they're females.
Yeah, but in China, where the church is not the opiate of the masses, but the amphetamine of the masses, they're doing that same thing. Where there's unwanted babies, they're taking them in. There's a vast exodus of female Chinese babies that are getting adopted by the Christian church in America, North America, and other places. So it's a little different from the Christian perspective than maybe what you're talking about as far as atheism, where we're one and done, and eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, and then after that, who knows? From the Christian perspective, there's a moral standard.
Jesus, you make a compelling story, but sorry. Ayn Rand is going to continue to be the money grubbing, boy toy loving gal that she's always been until, when did she die?
She died in like 1981 or something like that. You probably have it right
82.
there. 82.
She was 77.
And thank you for flashing up on the screen one more time my novel. Go out and buy my novel. I don't know where the money goes to now. Who knows who's got the right to it. But Screw the Poor, Let Them Die, and Other Humorous Observations by Ayn Rand. So,
what were Jesus' views on women? Why did he not have female disciples?
I mean, Jesus' view on women was absolutely revolutionary, and I'll give you two quick examples. One, females at that time, you think there's sexism now?
Right.
Females at that time were not even allowed to be witnesses in a court of law. And yet, who were the first two people that came to the empty tomb? It was Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene, the aforementioned prostitute. And so, they had Jesus, he went to the woman at the well. There was a woman a Samaritan woman, and you weren't supposed to talk to women at that time. And as a Jew, you weren't supposed to even be in that region, let alone talking to a Samaritan, which was kind of like a crossbreed.
Very conservative society, much more conservative than today. You're right.
So Jesus said, in Christ there is no Jew, there is no Greek, there is no male, there is no female. So he was extremely affirmative of women. And that's another difference between what you see in the Muslim faith and the Christian faith, generally speaking.
That's because the Muslim faith tends to be more conservative, but there are conservative sects within Christianity which are pretty much downgrade women to a lesser status. But on to speaking of other religions. We're going to flip now. I'm going to be Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. You're going to be Ayn Rand. And Basil insisted that I put a good word out for those sects of Christianity which are, for lack of a better word, more Christian-like than others. And let's start with the United Methodist Church. That's one of my favorites. Not supposed to play favorites, but I'm Jesus and I do what I'd like, thank you. So we have the United Church of Christ, we have the United Methodist Church, both very progressive, very liberal in their positions and in their attitudes toward the world. And on the other side, you have your Catholicism, which degrades women relative to men, won't let women rise to the priesthood, let alone ever become pope. Keeps them at a lesser status as human beings. You have a lot of Baptist churches, which God forbid a woman should come to church dressed in anything other than a dress. Pants, forget it. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a Mormon church, again, women don't. They will say that they have alternative things for women to do, which are of great importance, but the fact of the matter is that they downgrade and degrade the status of women. Women are second-class citizens within the Mormon Church, and you can argue whether the Mormon Church is Christianity or not. You can do that all you want, but it's certainly not either of the other two world religions. So, and I don't think you could call it a sect, although a lot of people will describe Mormonism as a sect. I think it's a true religion. I think it's a Christian religion, but it's a very conservative, very backward, if I may, Christian religion. So I had to put that word in for churches of my particular choice over other
How about
segments of Christianity?
How about Jehovah's Witnesses?
Well, that's a good question. Well, tell us about Jehovah's Witnesses. You want to jump in on that one too?
Well, I'll put in the
they come to my door,
but I can jump in on.
As an atheist point of view, what do you think of Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yeah.
No, I mean, well, first of all, I don't think that Christianity downgrades the role of women. Quite the contrary.
Some of their groups do.
That just has not been my experience. I go to a Walnut Hill Community Church right here in Bethel.
That's a very good church.
Vicky Calver is one of the pastors there.
Yep.
She preaches sermons from in front.
As you might know, I've been there occasionally.
Yeah, it's a great church. Walnut Hill Community Church. You all come down. There's an 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 11 o'clock service. And it's a delightful church, and women are in positions of authority throughout the church.
Then that's the way it should be.
Well, okay.
Thank you.
And I'm 53 years old. I've probably been in 100 Baptist churches. I've never been in one that I haven't seen women in slacks and outfits other than dresses. So I'm not sure where you're getting that from.
Maybe it's more of the Southern Baptist ilk.
Southern Baptist is one of the largest Baptist groups. I mean, the Southern Baptists do such good work. It's interesting when you look at some of the hurricanes.
But don't stray, my son. Don't stray from the subject.
Well,
of their attitudes toward women, and I know you have who's the Joel
Osteen.
Joel Osteen, who personally I like. I think he's very liberal for a conservative guy. He talks about, I saw a sermon once where he talked about he and his father. And his father was kind of old school. And Joel was going to go down to a get-together, a revival. And the revivalist, the person who was going to take stage and lead the revival was a little black gal. And Joel drags his father down there and says, "Look, Dad, you may not like it, but at least give it a try. You may not like seeing a woman up on stage running a revival. That may run contrary to what you are comfortable with, but give it a try." Took his dad down there, and at the end of the night, the dad was very much not necessarily in favor of women in general leading revivals, but at least this little black gal got his heart, and he was impressed by her. So Joel and his wife, I forget his wife's name, but they preach together, and I kind of
preach together,
and I kind of like them because they're really more. They're really good. I will call them liberal. I will call them open-minded, which is a classic definition of liberal. I'll call them progressive, and they relatively are. And I'll say, here's a little shout out to you, Joel. From God himself. So go ahead. Ayn, you're not saying anything. Come on.
No, I have plenty to say. Go ahead.
No, when I was in Italy studying, I met a lot of missionaries, because you mentioned in China that there's these upstart storefront churches starting up, and in Italy there's a lot of these churches popping up. And I'd met these missionaries. They were very Christian, and I felt my feeling was that the man was the husband was the preacher, and the wife stayed at home with the kids. And I remember being in their home, and she had this mural pointed on the wall, and it was comparing a woman to like a grapevine bearing fruit. And I thought, is that really in the Bible? Is there a quote about a woman being compared to a bearing fruit?
Well, it's interesting because
I just found that offensive personally as a woman. Like, that's our whole purpose.
I find that offensive as Jesus Christ.
Was that a real Bible quote? I just wasn't.
I don't know about the bearing fruit thing, but there's a chapter actually. It's in Proverbs 30, and it talks about the ideal woman. And it says things like her children come up and will rise up, and I can look it up real quick if you want, or I can I'll sort of highlight it as I.
I mean, I got it right here. I got it right here in my crib notes. But go ahead.
So if a woman
I got it right in my palm of my hand. But go ahead.
A woman can produce.
It's a description of a worthy woman, an excellent wife who can find. For her worth is far above jewels. The hearts of her husband trust her, and she will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She looks at wool and flax, and she works with her hands with delight. She's like a merchant ship, and she brings food from afar. She rises a while and still at night, and she gives food to her household and her portions. Here, listen to this. She's a real estate developer. You ready? She considers a field to buy it, and from her earnings she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. I mean, it sounds like a pretty affirmative image of a woman. She considers a field and she
nicely
buys it.
said.
Right.
She smiles at the future. Isn't that a nice kind of thing?
Yes,
She smiles at the futures, and then it closes with and her product of her hands, and she let her works praise her from the gates. But I mean, I won't go into all of its 31 verses, but that's the Christian perspective of a woman. Yes, her husband delights in her. Her children rise up and praise her. She considers the field and buys it. She's involved in commerce, and she's involved in work. Far from like what the role of women in Christianity that you're presenting is something that's
in some churches it is. It's very second-class citizenship.
Well, this is the Bible we all agree on, and maybe they haven't read.
Little known side note though, because Dad, hey Dad, he considered rather than the son of God, he considered the idea of having the daughter of God. But Dad's a little old-fashioned, you know. Let's face it, he's Old Testament, right or wrong. My dad, Old Testament. He considered the possibility of rather than having a son of God, having a daughter of God, but he couldn't get quite past that. He was more like Joel Osteen's dad than he was like Joel Osteen. And I could have been a woman, couldn't I have? And would it have made any difference? No, of course not. Of course not. If it had been the daughter of God rather than the son of God, no big deal, right?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
consider that for a moment.
If Jesus were a woman, would we be having this?
Consider that for a moment.
To be honest with you, Ayn, you're being Ayn Rand?
No, I'm Jesus.
Oh, you're Jesus. Jesus, or this person playing Jesus, you seem to be a little hung up on this whole, woman, man, woman thing. I think obviously there's a difference between a man and a woman.
Physiologically,
among other things, do you realize that our skull is thicker than yours? I don't know if that.
And our pelvis too.
Pelvis, yeah.
We have a wider hips.
I'm pretty comfortable with strong, dominant women. Anyone that knows my wife, anyone that knows my mother, I've been around strong, dominant women my whole life, and I love it. I have no problem with it whatsoever. And I think from the Christian point of view, as I pointed out with the early followers of Jesus, Jesus' role in interacting with women, and that verse in Proverbs 31 where it talks about the ideal woman as a real estate developer that raises a great family.
And I really shouldn't give this away because I've seen the future. I'm Jesus Christ. I'm the Son of God, and I've seen the future. But I know that within the next year or two, you're probably going to get used to having a woman as president of the United States.
Could be.
It may not be who you think it is. It's not going to be Hillary Clinton. It's going to be Elizabeth Warren. She's going to come out of the shadows, and she's going to be president. But having said that, you'll get an opportunity to find a woman as president, and won't that be just?
It'd be absolutely fine with me. I couldn't have been happier with Margaret Thatcher as the Prime Minister of
England.
There you go.
She was absolutely great. As a matter of fact, some of the wonderful things she said about socialism is that the only problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. And so I think having leadership like Margaret Thatcher or whomever the electorate votes on, whether it's a woman, an African American, a man, I really don't. I'm not hung up on it, and it's interesting because the younger generation in America really isn't either. All this like racism and sexism.
What if it's
feminism? I mean, you talk to your average 20-something, they're like, "What the hell are you talking about? That's pretty done."
Let's take it just a
war on women.
Let's just take it an iota. Let's just take it an iota further, and let's say hypothetically, the next president of the United States is a gay or homosexual, if you will, a gay woman. No problem, right?
No.
There you go. Ain't America great?
I mean, it really is. I mean, when you consider who I've done a little study of the presidency itself, and who has risen to the presidency. I mean, you could take Bill Clinton.
Right.
I mean, kind of a child born out of wedlock, had stepfathers that were terrible alcoholics.
And bad role models for him, apparently.
Bad role models, and yet he rose to the presidency.
Right.
I mean, Abraham Lincoln is a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
Barack Obama. I mean, first of all, with that name, Barack Hussein Obama, I mean, if we were sort of this, like, racist country, how does he get elected twice?
Right.
I would propose to you that we're really not all that racist. There is no war on women, and everyone needs to get over all that, and let's just get on with being friends and having a great country together. That's what I think's going on.
Very noble objective, and let's work towards that. Well, I'll let you work towards that, but one last little note from the Son of God is that God, this notion of God bless America. I don't think in any other country of the world they have put forth the notion that God somehow favors their country over other countries. It's only here in America. Let me just set the record straight. God does not favor any individual country or society. God loves everyone equally.
Yeah, I would say God loves everyone equally, but I will say that America has been an incredibly blessed country. I mean, when you look at it historically, the blessings of geography. We got the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. There hasn't been a foreign invader that has come into our country. The only war we've had that was the bloodiest of our history was the Civil War. We're fighting among ourselves.
Yeah.
Natural resources, a government that, by and large, the current situation notwithstanding, has given men freedom to pursue happiness. The Constitution that we have the right to liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and that these aren't rights that were given to us by some government, but these we claim in our Constitution are God-given
It was our
rights.
the first ones that governed us wrote these up. Our first governing body, the Continental Congress. So that's our government.
So we had the right
that was our government, wasn't it?
It was.
So yes, it was our government that gave it to us.
No, but the government wrote up a constitution that said that these rights are inalienable rights given to us by a creator, not given to us by a king or some sort of government body. But these are inalienable rights given us to the right to life and the pursuit of happiness.
And they also said keep religion out of government and government out of religion because when they get mixed together, it's very bad for both.
And I think we've done a great job of that, to be honest with you. I mean, it was interesting with the show we had with the two imams here. There isn't. It is a great patchwork. It is a great melting pot of religion and ethnicity and political persuasions, and we have this wonderful diversity and pluralism in the United States, and it's been this way for a long time, and it is our strength.
With that, I'm going to put one more quick note in. Progressive Soup on YouTube, Kristen40, Kristin, which just happens to be my wife's name, Kristen40, and on Facebook, Progressive Soup. And with that, we're going to wind it down. We've had a very intriguing discussion, and
I'll say.
But what a great group of people to get together and talk about this and walk away and continue to be the best of friends.
Absolutely.
And we got to get back to that hockey game. Good night.
Good night.
We're going to do some more hockey with Marty soon. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.